Hello, welcome to the interview here on France 24. Well, a little over a month after Ukraine and pro-Russian rebels signed a fragile ceasefire, the death toll in Ukraine's six-month war continues to climb by the day. Separatist fighters, meanwhile, they show no signs of going quietly into the night, as they say. Some fear that their self-proclaimed strongholds in the east are already beginning to look a lot like neo-Soviet mini-states. Now, my guest today is Volodymyr Yermolenko. Welcome to our studios. You're a Ukrainian philosopher, you're an essayist, you're a political scientist, you teach at one of the most prestigious universities in Ukraine, and you wrote a very hard-hitting article recently in which you basically said Ukraine's current crisis is a result of what you could say a Russian-made geopolitical doctrine, and you call it Sado-Putinism. The rules are pretty simple. There are no rules, or at least no rules that can't be broken. Tolerance is weakness. Dialogue is a failure to impose force, and only one side can be victorious, while others should lose and lose brutally. And you really point the finger at Putin. Sado-Putinism. Let me begin with Putin. Is that not... If you say that to most people, they'll say, even if they're anti-Putin, even if they have reservations about the Russian president, they'll say, isn't that going a little bit too far, Volodymyr? Isn't it too far to call him sadistic, Putin? He's the president of Russia.
No, I don't think that it's going too far, because basically this atmosphere of sadism is very typical for Soviet Union and post-Soviet republics. Because I think that there is a very big difference in the modernization in Western countries in Soviet Union. Basically, Soviet Union did not say to people that they have a right to pleasure. And when citizens don't have a right to pleasure, then the only pleasure is to make others suffer. That's basically the major logic.
But you actually say that Vladimir Putin takes pleasure in watching other people suffer.
Of course, I think that his logic is that logic of a 19th century social Darwinism, in which basically either you win or you lose. You cannot be winners. Everybody not can be a winner. So his pleasure is to make others suffer. And basically, you see that, for example, I give you one example. After the first meeting in Minsk in August, just the day after this meeting between Poroshenko and Putin, Putin opens the second front next to Mariupol. So it's just precisely to show to the West that the negotiations are nothing, that the peace talks are nothing, and he can do whatever he wants.
And there seems to be a real thought in your writing, your recent writing, that the West, Europe, the United States, really do not get Putin. They just don't understand him. You called one article "The Silence of the Lambs." The West is being silent, and they're lambs. They don't understand the man.
Yeah, I think there is a difference in logic, because the West is thinking that basically is thinking in terms of positive sum game, thinking in terms of building the relations in which everybody should win, including Putin probably. But Putin is thinking in a logic of a zero-sum game. Either he wins and other loses, or if he doesn't win, that means that he loses. So I think this difference in logic is very important to understand. And in this logic, only force has a meaning, and any step back, any concession, will be considered by Putin as a weakness, which provokes him to act. It's this idea of not provoking Putin which provokes Putin.
Not provoking provokes him.
Yes, exactly.
That's an interesting concept. Now, when I was reporting from East Ukraine, you'd see a lot of checkpoints in the Donbass region, Donetsk and Luhansk regions, manned by separatists. I also saw a lot of territory in the east that was not held by separatists. Give us a sense, what's your sense of how much territory is actually held today by the separatists in the east of the country?
It's about 2 or 3% of Ukrainian territory. So when we're talking about
2%.
2% or 3%, yes, it's not more. Just you can look at the map. Ukrainian government is publishing regularly, almost on the daily basis, the map of this war. It's not even the whole of Donbass region. It's not even the whole of Donetsk and Luhansk regions. So it's just 2 or 3%. It's very localized.
And yet that 2 to 3%, in your opinion, is that enough to prevent Petro Poroshenko, the Ukrainian president, from being able to truly reunite the country?
Well, the experience shows with Moldova, with Georgia, that basically if you have such a big monster as Russia who is supporting secessionist regions, there is little chance that these regions will come back, because every time then there is an attempt to reintegrate it, Russia can use its leverage. I have a metaphor for that we are passing from the terrorist epoch to post-terrorist epoch, when instead of bomb cars or bombers, suicide killers, you have suicide states.
Little statelets.
Little states which are basically can explode at any moment, and which Russia has as its geopolitical
enough
bombs.
to create instability, enough instability
exactly.
to prevent effective governance.
And go back to your question about reuniting Ukraine. I think Ukraine is reunited. We were talking about in years 2000 about two Ukraines, and at that epoch, if you look at electoral maps, you will see that Ukraine is divided in two parts. Basically, one is pro-Soviet or pro-Russian, and another is pro-Western. Now it's no longer the case.
That's too simple. In other words, it's east and west.
Yes. Now it's no longer the case, because many eastern cities like Kharkiv, like Dnipropetrovsk, like southern cities Odessa, Mykolaiv, Kherson, they are really pro-Ukrainian now and pro-European.
Let me ask you another thing. Also, when I was reporting there, and I'm curious to hear what you think about this, we'd often get people coming up to us on the street, say in Luhansk. One woman would come up and whisper to us, "I'm not for these rebels. I'm not for them. I'm not for," almost scared, but whispering. Do you think there's a very large silent majority who are very fearful of the rebels, not supportive of them, but scared to speak out?
Well, I think we should not over-exaggerate these people. I think that, of course, there are people who are against the rebels, but generally, I have an impression, talking to many journalists from the regions, that basically the majority is still for the rebels, or you can say that probably 20% is for the rebels, 10% is for Ukraine, and then 70% want this war to be over.
Just to be over.
So there is very large portion of population which are basically indifferent to any kind of power. Their indifference is basically the major defensive force, the major defensive reaction against what is happening. So it's also important to know that.
We have elections coming up in the next couple of weeks in Ukraine. We have what's supposed to be national elections, but we also have the rebels who are organizing their own vote in early November. How is that going to work? Two competing votes.
I think we are going to a de facto to a situation when there will be a de facto kind of a state organism in these rebel-controlled territories, because they will have the elected, legitimized leaders. They will have the militia, which is basically composed of those people who are now fighting. So basically, I think that there will be, as long as Russia supports them, there will be little chance to reintegrate these territories fully into Ukraine. But we should understand that the real fight is for Ukraine as a whole. And in this situation, we cannot make Ukraine a hostage to these regions. It's better to have a European modernized Ukraine without these little territories than to have Ukraine with Donbass, but old style or post-Soviet state.
We don't have that much time left. Personally, for you, I'm curious. You right now, you're based in Kyiv, the capital, very much obviously the center of the central government of Ukraine. Do you feel comfortable, would you feel comfortable traveling in the East? And how would you define your Ukrainian identity?
Well, that depends where we travel into the East. If we travel to cities like Slavyansk, cities to Mariupol, which are still controlled by Ukrainian forces, it's okay. But if you travel to Donetsk, Luhansk, you have every chances to be arrested.
And do you find when you do travel in the country, people say, oh, you're from Kiev, and they think you're on one side or the other?
Well, there are some activists who were arrested and who spent several months in prison of rebels, and basically Ukrainian journalists cannot enter these territories. That makes a problem.
Will Poroshenko be able to keep the country together even as he prevents the country's economy from crumbling?
Well, that's very important. I think what is really important is to keep Ukrainian economy stabilize and grow. This is the major thing, because the Russian ambition is to make Ukraine economically be destabilized or be destroyed. And that's here, it's very important to have also support of the West in terms of economy. It's very good that European Union opened its market for Ukrainian goods. And we had 25% of growth of Ukrainian exports to the EU in 2 months.
25% growth in 2 months. I'll leave it on one slightly pessimistic note, however. There are estimates that the economy could shrink by 9% this year, so there's quite a challenge ahead.
Yes, of course.
Volodymyr Yermolenko, we're going to have to leave it there, but thank you very much. You're a philosopher, you're an essayist, you have a lot of titles. You teach at Kyiv-Mohyla Academy in Kiev, one of the most prestigious institutions of learning in the country, and I really appreciate you sharing your thoughts on what is a developing situation in your country right now.
Thank you very much.
And thanks to all of you for watching the interview here on France 24. Lots of news just ahead.